When you were a child, silence wasn't empty. It was a place, a room you walked into without fear, a space where you felt things before you understood them, where you knew what people meant even when they said nothing, where connection wasn't spoken, it was sensed. But somewhere along the way, silence stopped feeling like a home. It became a gap to fill, a discomfort to escape, a void to drown with noise. And without noticing, you forgot the language you once spoke fluently. A language made not of words, but of what happens between them. This is about what happens when you find it again. There's a language you were born understanding. You didn't learn it. You didn't study it. You lived inside it. You felt it when someone held your hand and you instantly knew you were safe. You felt it when a room felt warm before you even opened your eyes. You felt it when someone's silence said more than their words ever could. Back then, connection didn't require conversation. It required presence, attention, stillness. You didn't call it intuition. You didn't call it energy. You didn't call it anything. Because real languages don't need labels. When you were young, you understood people before you understood speech. You knew who was kind by the way they breathed near you. You knew who was sad by the way they held their shoulders. You knew who loved you by the way their eyes softened. Not because you were smart, but because you were quiet enough to notice. The world hadn't taught you yet to second-guess the things your body whispered. It hadn't taught you to distrust the feeling that rose in your chest before your mind could explain it. You were fluent then, fluent in the language of silence. But then you grew, and the world told you a different story. Use your words. Explain yourself. Don't assume. Don't just feel, prove it. And slowly, silence stopped being a language. It became a test you needed to fill with noise. You learned to speak before you learned to feel. You learned to answer before you learned to listen. You learned to talk even when nothing inside you had anything to say. And so the old language faded, not because you lost it, but because everyone around you had already forgotten it. Have you ever felt yourself disconnect because there was too much noise? We live in a world where silence is suspicious. If someone pauses too long, we ask what's wrong. If there's no message for an hour, we assume the worst. If a conversation quiets down, we reach for our phones. Instead of connection, we chase stimulation. Instead of presence, we chase distraction. We fill the space where intuition speaks with everything that drowns it out. Notifications, opinions, content, commentary, noise disguised as communication. But here's the irony. We've never talked more, and we've never felt less understood. When was the last time you felt heard, truly heard? Let me tell you about Sarah. She was 29, smart, planned, analytical, the kind of person who made spreadsheets just to choose a new toothbrush. When she got 2 job offers, the decision seemed obvious. One was stable, prestigious, perfectly aligned. The other was smaller, uncertain, strange. Everyone told her to accept the first, her friends, her parents, her mentors. But there was a tiny moment, barely noticeable, during her final interview at the perfect job. A tightening in her chest, a quiet pressure in her throat, a whisper telling her no. She ignored it. Because how do you defend a feeling in front of logic? 6 months later, she was miserable. Not because the job was bad, but because she had silenced the part of her that had tried to protect her. She didn't lack information. She lacked silence. She didn't need more facts. She needed space to hear herself. Have you ever said yes while your whole body said no? There is a moment, right before a thought forms, where your body tells the truth. A shift in your breathing, a warming in your chest, a tightening in your stomach, a pull, a push, a whisper. This is the language beneath the language, the message before the explanation, the connection before the sentence. But we're trained to ignore it. We call it nerves, or insecurity, or imagination. Anything except what it actually is. You, speaking to you. Now let me tell you about Daniel. He was the kind of man who struggled to say what he felt. His words always came out wrong, too late, too soft, too incomplete. But his silence said everything. He drove an extra 20 minutes just to drop someone off closer to their door. He bought 2 coffees, one he didn't even drink, because he knew mornings were hard for her. He always stood a little closer to the edge of the sidewalk, so she walked on the inside. He was fluent in the language of quiet care. But she never noticed, because she listened to words, not gestures, to sentences, not presence. She waited for him to speak. He waited for her to feel. They never met in the middle. And that's the thing about silence. It can connect you or separate you depending on whether you know how to listen. So what if connection wasn't something you built with words, but something you revealed with attention? What if the moments that mattered most in your life weren't the ones you talked through, but the ones you sat through? What if you're not supposed to fill silence, but enter it? What part of yourself do you only hear when everything else is quiet? Your body is your oldest translator. It reacts before your mind understands. It warns you before your thoughts catch up. It senses people long before you decide whether to trust them. A drop in your stomach, a softening in your chest, a tingling in your hands. These aren't coincidences. They're sentences, written in a language you stopped reading. Silence isn't empty. It's a dictionary. Every pause is a page. Every heartbeat is a verb. Every breath is an answer. There are 2 kinds of silence: the silence that disconnects you, and the silence that brings you home. The first happens when you're afraid to speak, when you swallow what hurts, when you pretend everything is fine. That silence is heavy. But the second is different. It's the silence you step into willingly, the silence where your intuition resurfaces, where your real voice returns, where connection grows roots. That silence is not an absence. It's a presence. So maybe the work isn't learning how to connect again. Maybe it's remembering how to be quiet enough to feel it. Maybe connection doesn't happen in conversations. Maybe it happens in the pauses between them. Maybe the moments that change your life aren't loud. Maybe they're whisper soft. A shared glance, a deep breath, a hesitation, a choice made without words. What if everything meaningful begins in silence? Healing, intuition, love, forgiveness, understanding, self-awareness. What if silence isn't emptiness but clarity? What if silence isn't loneliness but recognition? What if silence isn't the absence of connection, but the birthplace of it? If this touched something in you, write one quiet thought below. You never know who might need your silence turned into words. Maybe the question was never, what if connection happens in silence? Maybe the real question is, what if silence is the only place where connection ever truly happens? Because you didn't lose the language of silence. You didn't forget how to feel. You didn't outgrow your intuition. You just stopped believing the quiet parts of you mattered. But they do. They always did. And maybe, just maybe, the person you're trying to become has been waiting for you in the very place you've been avoiding. The silence.